Hello and welcome back to another edition of Civic Discussion here at GNAT-TV. Today is Friday, January 9th. My name is Andrew McKeever. I am one of the co-hosts. I'm here with the other co-host, Don Keelan. Don, good to see you again.
And Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year indeed. Yeah, great to be back. And we are also very pleased to have with us a special guest today. Rob Gaiotti is the town manager of Dorset, as I'm sure many of you know. And Rob is here to have a conversation with us about the Raptor Lane project, which many of you have probably already heard about, but basically it's a proposal to put some housing units on a roughly 300-acre parcel of land that the town has acquired. It is also where the town hall has moved to back last fall, September, I think, if I'm correct. And so there has been conversations and studies done about how to use that property for housing. And so here to bring us up to speed is the town manager, who's been spending a lot of time on this subject, I can tell you, just from watching select board meetings and reading a lot of the documents that have been posted on the town's website. So Rob, just to kind of get us started here, I wondered if you could just sort of tell us a little bit, sort of an overview of the project, kind of how did it begin, what prompted the idea to use the property for housing, and kind of where are we going from here?
Sure. So first off, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here. And this, helping get the word out about the project and kind of our process is really important. So I'm excited to be here and answer questions. Raptor Lane. To kind of start at the genesis, you have to go back to 2014. The town conserved some property that was adjacent to our town forest. The same owner that owned that conservation property owned the lower campus at Raptor Lane. They, in like 2016, reached back out to the town about potentially acquiring it through a bargain sale. So we did that. After we acquired it, and what we acquired is 300 acres. It's an 8-lot subdivision. There's about 1.5 miles of roads, some utility conduits on the site. A bunch of the house sites for the 8 lots were cleared. So a lot of work had been done. Once the town acquired it, we created kind of a subcommittee to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with this? Through that process, we defined a few things through some surveys and some public input, as well as kind of subcommittee work. They outlined the need for hiking and biking trail work, the concept of moving the municipal office over there. Housing was defined as a need, and then I think a couple other things that they looked at were like energy generation and then potential commercial use. So that the first couple of things we worked on pretty quick. The trails we've done a lot of work on. We've partnered with the North Shore Area Trails Group to put the better part of $275,000 into hiking and biking trails up there, which everybody loves and it's great. Obviously, we moved the town office there last year. That was about a 4-year process that's now done, and that's the new home. And then the housing piece is the one that is kind of active, right now. We as in Dorset created a housing committee a couple of years ago, and one of the things that is unique is that we've got Raptor Lane in order to kind of look at the need for housing, what's feasible, possible, and you're kind of seeing us go through that process now, where we're trying to figure out, what's out there in terms of development opportunity, and how we can hopefully fill a need for the community.
Well, Don, I know housing is a subject dear to your heart, and you have a whole bunch of questions lined up for Rob here, so let me turn the mic over to you here.
Well, there's quite a bit of controversy now created. This project was moving ahead quite well with the planning and the studies being done. And then I think in late last year, you've had some public hearings, and you were getting ready, the town was getting ready to do execute a pre-development agreement with an organization that you brought to your attention that could develop this property from Rutland, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Sure.
But the concern is, I gather, that the town is going to sign this pre-development agreement, and it's going to transfer the property to the developer and also commit the town to several millions of dollars. The fact of the matter is, when you read the development agreement, the draft of it anyway, it doesn't do that at all. It's just and I've looked at it. It's an agreement between the town and the developer and the potential developer to find out what more can be done with the project and more specifics about it. Because the project is proposed for anywhere from, I saw 87 units all the way up to 125 units of mixed use, all the way from rentals, condos, and single family. And the project's going to need infrastructure quite a bit with water, wastewater, drainage, and so forth. I think the word should get out that if the town were to execute this agreement, the town is not committed to bonding at this point. The town is not. There's no funds going to be transferred, and nor will the property be transferred. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a good read on what that document does.
The developer, tell me about that. How much do you know about the developer who's going to work on this project?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Scott Graves moved here a couple years ago from, I think, the Midwest, but he grew up in kind of central and western Massachusetts. He lives in Rutland. His background is actually as a performing musician. But he's got a lot of business acumen, and he's the guy that has kind of created this, the team, so to speak, around the concept that he's put forward. So, our process, I can kind of back up just a sec to, our process was that we got a certain, we did a bunch of feasibility study work for the site to figure out what the, kind of what the potential capacity was. Pretty quickly at the end of that, realized that the town's not a developer, and so we hired White and Burke to help us kind of advise us through the process. So that pushed through an RFP for potential development partners. Scott's one of the ones that responded, and that's kind of what got us to this point.
How much of the background of this company have you really checked out?
So White and Burke would have gone through, all the vetting process of Scott, Scott's team, the investment team, the financial management team, the engineering firm that's working along with Scott is Bowman Engineering. It's a really big firm. The principal kind of contact at Bowman is Paul Simon, who's worked in Vermont in the Chittenden County area for a long time.
But what I'm trying to get at, Rob, is no one has a more vested interest in this project than the people of Dorset.
Sure.
And you and your colleagues, your select board. Has anyone gone to see any projects that they've done? Have you visited them? You as a town manager and as a board visited the specific project, and also discussed it with the existing residents of that project and town officials from where they had done, and how did they do in those towns?
Specifically, no, we haven't. That we, being the town, haven't traveled to any of the sites where they've done projects. We've relied on White and Burke to do kind of the early review of their capabilities, and during that early review, there's nothing that was raised that would say that they're not capable. So, you read the pre-development agreement. You know that we're very early in the stage. One of the things that will likely be added into the pre-development agreements, and it's in a draft, is that during that process we have to figure out what the real capacity of the land is, and that's through the kind of water and sewer work, and then also during that process, the town, White and Burke, and our attorney have to figure out what the financial capacity of Graves' team is, and whether or not they're capable of doing it, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, Rob, my impression is of the project that a fair amount of the housing, assuming the project goes forward and everything, will be kind of workforce housing or senior housing. What are the arguments, I guess, for having that mix or of housing. I suppose there might be, what's the term, market rate housing as part of it as well. But I mean, one of the questions I gather that has come up is that does Dorset really need workforce housing? So what is the argument that you would make saying, hey, you know, we do need homes for people in the mid-range?
Yeah, so when we went into the RFP, we tried to define, you know, who the target customer is and kind of what the range of home values would be potentially. So in our case, the thought was a mixed income neighborhood that would be very similar to like what exists in most of Dorset, most of other communities kind of in the area where you drive down a street and there's a conglomeration of different houses with people that are in different kind of stages of life and different socioeconomic situations. So that's kind of what exists and what's natural. So the thought was a mixed income neighborhood is something that would match what exists elsewhere in town. Specifically to the workforce and kind of senior piece, some of the touch points that we've had through the last 8+ years of housing needs assessments, economic development studies, a lot of this other stuff has given us touch points with residents related to employers saying that access to housing is one of the biggest things that they deal with when they try to recruit and retain employees, as well as kind of on the far end of that is existing residents that are in a big house, they're retired, they'd like to downsize, but there's essentially no place to downsize to. So the thought behind the target market and the concept was that to include both of those potential customers. And the idea to have market rate potentially offset some of the lower cost homes.
Has anyone pushed?
Go ahead.
Has anyone actually pushed the numbers on that? Have you seen anything on that make that work?
No. So we're so far we're very early into the process. Obviously, we have a need, we have a potential site. And now we have a potential development partner, and some of the next steps are going to be to try to figure out how the funding is going to work to support the infrastructure, to support the work to actually happen. I think what you're going to find likely is when you do all that math, you're going to see that there's going to be potentially a gap. That gap is the reason that these homes don't exist. These homes in a certain price range, they're not profitable to build, so they don't get built. But that doesn't mean that they're not needed or that we shouldn't have them. The general sense is that when we do this work and that there is a potential funding gap, that's where the state in their process is probably going to be needed to come in through any funding gap with a private developer. You'd be looking at state and federal grants, tax credits, and then the state has got this new CHIP program, which is the Community Housing and Infrastructure Program, where they're trying to help to close that gap so units like this can get built.
So our viewers understand that the CHIP program, which was adopted last year by the legislature, enables a town to take the tax revenues from that town and use it to pay off the bonds that the town may have issued to fund that infrastructure work on that project. In other words, the taxes from Raptor Lane would not go to the state. It would go strictly to help pay not help pay, but to actually pay the debt service on the bond.
Correct.
Now and that's, you haven't adopted that yet in town, right? And the other thing you haven't adopted is the Tier 1B zoning, right? And that's a bit of a controversial matter right now, because if you adopt Tier 1B zoning, it enables, that could apply to any place in town then.
No, so the CHIP program is something that you apply for, and you have to meet a lot of the state's benchmarks. The CHIP program's model after tax increment financing, which is a traditional kind of redevelopment tool that commercial areas within communities use to try to get old commercial buildings reused. The Tier 1B stuff is part of the state, in its infinite wisdom, I think last year finally felt that housing is such a need that they've changed 50-year-old land use laws through Act 181, and the Tier 1B piece is part of that. So it's basically a state land use process. The towns will have to designate certain locations within their community that they want to be used as potentially Tier 1B. You have to apply to the state, you have to meet their parameters, and then they approve it. The upshot of the Tier 1B is that in certain areas where the state allows it to happen, the housing projects within those certain areas would potentially be exempt from Act 250 under certain pretenses. So like there's a limitation to 50 units in a Tier 1B project. So like for us, the unit count that we're talking about has been higher than that. So it's kind of unclear as to whether or not Tier 1B will even, it could be a tool if you meet their parameters. If you don't, it might not be a tool. But it doesn't. I think one important distinction is that it doesn't prevent us from going through local zoning and permitting process, and that's still got to happen. There's about a dozen or so permits that a project like this has to get through its lifespan, and we're sitting at a spot where nothing's been designed and nothing's been permitted yet. So we still have to kind of.
And that's at the town and state level, the 10 or 12.
Yeah, it's town, state, federal, because there's you even have some Army Corps stuff in there that's applicable. But yeah, so in our in Dorset's case, we updated our zoning a couple years ago. That document went from 85 pages to 215 pages, and this particular project would be a planned unit development. It would have to go through a pretty rigorous process at the local level.
The project, one of the concepts is to have 48 rental units, condos, and several, and then I believe 15 single-family residents. That is just a concept. It's not what's been adopted. But the project does not have wastewater or portable water. One of the things the consultant said is to have the site have its own water system to service 100 some odd homes. And obviously the same thing about wastewater. Can that be operated by a homeowners association if you have a rental company running the rental units, a homeowners association running the condo, and then the single families? Is that putting the town under the possibility that one day, guess what, you guys are running it?
You mean the water system?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's fairly natural for the progression of these projects. In other parts of the country where stuff gets built, there's a kind of a progression where a lot of times the infrastructure that goes along with the new neighborhood would be something like the roads get plowed by the town, and then potentially the water system gets operated by the town. Water systems are enterprise funds, so the people that are on it pay for the operation and maintenance of it. So the town operating the water system, if it were to come to pass, those costs would still be borne from the people that are on it. But again, it's we're very, very early in the process. The general thinking is that we don't have municipal sewer, so anything that happens on the site here is going to need its own water source. When you get over a certain amount of units, it's going to have to be a large system because that's what Vermont requires.
And highly regulated. When you start to service
public drinking water systems are they're about as highly regulated as a thing that exists in Vermont.
Now the town has the town shut the door on extending the water line from the town to this property?
No, that's a good question. I mean, I think that there are some. Our hope is that we're still probably a couple of years of design permitting process to work through, And if our hope is that if there's some synergies where, larger community needs could be met, we can look at that. Right now, there's no general plan. The Dorset Village system they're working through a process where they've done a bunch of work recently. They're really starting to kind of turn the corner in terms of the daily use and the restrictions. But right now there's a moratorium on new connections in the village, and there's kind of a limit on what the capacity of the springs will do. But in a perfect world, there would be enough. You'd marry the two together, and you'd end up with more customers to help create some economies of scale.
Andrew?
Yeah, one of the fellows, I think it was at Whitenburg, I spoke to many months ago, mentioned, and I hadn't really thought about it until he raised the subject, was that it was a lot of housing projects that are going forward across Vermont are being built on town-owned land. And that's the case in Raptor Lane, obviously. And I hadn't really thought about that, but that's basically where the town already owns the property, so the developer doesn't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever it might be, so the costs do come down. I guess I just wondered, do you think that that's a really important piece as we look at housing across the state, where, the entire state needs more housing. We've kind of been in that position for a while now. How important is that factor, that the town would own the property to let the developer come in and just start building?
I think that what you're seeing, that's a reaction to the market conditions and the reality of, the leaders of the state and communities are now, especially, in the 5 years after COVID, real estate in our area has always been it's a big deal. It's a integral part of the economy. And we have a second home and tourism economy here, which is really good. So we're kind of used to that. Across the state, their values have appreciated considerably, and inventory has gone way down. So now you have almost every community talking about it, the state talking about it. So the natural progression is where are the opportunities? And if the town owns or has an asset that potentially could meet a need, then you have those discussions. So I think it's just I don't know that it's needed. That it's just an opportunity that sits there to potentially solve a need.
Right, because I've heard, as you will know, Don, there are so many obstacles to building homes between construction costs, labor costs, and and permitting issues and whatnot that slows things down. But I wanted to shift a little bit and ask you kind of what you've been hearing from other residents in the town. There's been a certain amount of back and forth around whether or not this is a good idea to build 50 to 100 or whatever houses. Some of the select board meetings I've heard, people are saying, well, do we really need that many housing? Do we need to build workforce housing? Mm-hmm. I guess my question is, how do you kind of respond to people who say, yeah, what do we need this for? This isn't Dorset.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so for our process, right? We've outlined a need. We've kind of figured out that, well, the town does have an asset that we could potentially use to try to help solve that problem. To the comment of, there is a bit of a, I think, misconception out there right now with where we are in the process. Don had talked about the pre-development agreement, and some folks I think are understanding that we may be at a different part of the process. But I think the opportunity that kind of sits in front of us right now is that you're going to see kind of in real time a community define a need. So that's what we're going to have to do over the next months, is to further define the need. Figure out okay, Raptor Lane is an opportunity. What scope and scale is appropriate. What do people think? So we have to go through a public input process where everybody gets a chance to tell us what they think, and then we have to kind of winnow all that down to hopefully at the end of the day define a project that we think is actionable, that can then make it through a design, financing, funding stack, get permitted, and then kind of carried out. So I think it's going to be, you'll see kind of in real time, I would call it really the democratic process, where town land is going to have to be, kind of reviewed and more or less, thought about as a potential solution to a community problem, which is interesting. One of the things that is forthcoming is a pretty in-depth housing market analysis that we're going to use to then support, okay, if we pick X amount of units, there's going to be some sense about, okay, that's been informed by a market analysis that said these are the types of units that you need, these are how many you could potentially support, here's the price ranges, here's the rents that you could expect and support, so that if we say a certain amount of units in terms of the project, it's going to be backed up by some actual data points as to what the market can needs and can support.
How much, you mentioned this market feasibility, not market, well, it is a market feasibility, I guess, or housing feasibility.
Yeah, yep.
The town of Dorset already has quite an invested interest in this property, not only with having acquired the land, but you've paid quite a bit of money so far to date on consultants with the Whitenberg and then the engineers and then the market. How much have you spent to date and how much are you committed to?
Good question. So this goes back about 6 years, but to date we've spent about $140,000, and that, if you go on our website, you see the full gamut of what that's done from our early review to try to figure out, out of the 300 acres, what's developable. That process kind of turned out that out of the 300, there's about 110 that are buildable. So the housing study isn't in that 140. We haven't incurred those costs yet.
How much will that be?
That's about 38,000.
So and then you'll continue to use Whitenberg, right?
Yeah, so we have an agreement for them to be our consultant that helps steward us through this process. The funding for that 148, 42,000. The first chunks were actually, the first couple of chunks were town funds, where we actually took money out of fund balance, out of surplus 5 or 6 years ago, to do some of that to better define what the town owned. And then the rest of the funding so far, including the housing study, or the housing and market analysis, are all going to be funded out of basically our ARPA money.
And then you're asking, in the pre-development agreement, assuming you went forward with that, you're asking the developer to engage architects,
Yep.
Engineers, landscape architects, land planners, attorneys, and also do a marketing feasibility. That's asking quite a lot of the developer, wouldn't you say?
It is, yeah, it is. I think that to the point of, the agreements and the process, they need to, we need to define a project that everybody supports, and then we need to protect the town in terms of, during that process to protect the town from the process itself. So to make sure that we get a good development partner, to make sure that we have off ramps for any of agreement, so that if part of the project happens or part of it doesn't, that there's the town is protected. So.
But you could be the developer could be running into close to $1 million in the pre-development work that I just described,
Yep.
and still not know that they're going to go forward with the project, and have. You can either walk from the project or they can walk from the project, but that's quite a bit of.
Yeah, so
you're asking quite a bit. I mean, is it feasible? But I'll let you go ahead.
Sure. No, I think that's that's a fair question. So the way the pre-development agreement initially is written right now, is that we would get through that process, and that the town would negotiate in good faith. That we would do our best to try to make sure that there was a project that they could execute.
Does the developer think that they, from their standpoint, they're going to own this property by signing this development agreement? I mean, it's clear that they don't.
Correct.
But what's their perspective?
I don't know the answer to that yet. We've been so part of you had mentioned our process. We were starting to get into the pre-development agreement kind of negotiations and discussions, and as we did that, we've kind of had the public input process. It found us, so we're now taking the time to folks are expressing opinions about the concept and the idea and all that. So the pre-development agreement is kind of, right now it's kind of on hold until we work through this public input process where people can better understand the concept, where we are in the process, and what that all kind of means for them. So we'll go back to it when we get to that point.
Andrew?
I was wondering, what's been the reaction of property abutters to this idea? Have they been supportive? Have they been going, not in my backyard? What's been the reaction of those folks?
Sure. So we took there's probably about 10 homes that are, kind of that share abutting, boundaries. The town, in advance of even the Graves concept, reached out to all the neighbors to try to create a dialogue. We met with I think 6 or 8 of the 10 in order to try to put a face on the potential discussion. And I think part of what you're seeing with the request for more public input and the process is it's partly coming from the community, which does include neighbors, and in our case, our hope is that one of the nicest things about Raptor Lane is that it's the way it's situated with the topography. You can't see it from Route 30, and we can design the neighborhood to not be seen from abutting homes, which is really pretty unique and kind of special. And we're hoping that the neighbors will, tell us the thoughts about the concept and think about what impacts that it may have for them and what we can do to mitigate those impacts.
Yeah, because I mean, one of my first thoughts about this project when I first heard of it was that perfect. No one could see it from anywhere. We've got nobody next door. I mean, unlike a lot of other housing projects you hear about, where it's in plain sight. That wasn't the case. And I've often thought, since there seems to be so much pushback to housing projects, wherever they're proposed, it seems like, one tool that might be useful would be to offer people who are going to have to look at it across the street or whatever, to give them some kind of offsetting benefit. And whether that would be like a discount on their property taxes for a year or some kind of something. Whenever I hear a solar farm being proposed someplace and people kind of get a little frantic about that, I think, well, what if you gave them a discount on their electricity rates for a year or something like that? I guess I just wondered, as you've gone through this whole project, does it seem like that would be something, and also based on just your other experiences with housing, would that be something that would work or be useful, or is that just sort of, that's not going to change?
What he's saying is to buy them off.
Yeah.
And, prevent them
I guess, yeah.
Come
Or
on,
to bribe them,
speak,
whatever. I've heard that term used.
and
But it just
to,
strikes me as like, okay, people bought a home. It was in a certain kind of area at some point, whenever it was, 20, 30, or whatever years ago. A lot of their net worth is tied up in that home and the value of the home. And now all of a sudden it's being changed. That pristine view that they used to have is now going to be different.
Sure.
So, would it be fair or reasonable to say, okay, the world keeps changing and things don't stay the same the way they were.
Yeah.
So, to help you kind of accept that this is happening and will give you some kind of a break on something.
Sure. So I will do my best to try to answer it. So I think in our case, Raptor Lane is a subdivision between two subdivisions. So it's it's an 8-lot subdivision that's sitting there between two existing subdivisions. So anybody that buys property next to it, right, and sees that you're buying a house in a subdivision with a subdivision next to it, I mean, you would think that the natural progression of things would be that eventually there's going to be homes in that subdivision.
Right.
So that's kind of the first, I guess, statement is that, that's the natural progression of things. The second piece would be, in Vermont's a Dillon's rule state, which means that towns can only do what the state statutes say that you can do. So I don't really know the answer to whether or not we would be able to entertain any of those things. I think, my hope is that, that the neighbors could understand the need, right? So the need is part of it. BBA didn't have a Winhall bus yesterday because there was no bus driver. That kind of, it speaks to the need. I think people need to take a second, especially if you live in the community or if you spend significant time in the community, to try to, get yourself into the boots of the people living in the community to better understand, the day-to-day life and what the needs are. So the hope is that, people will have some kind of empathy through that process as neighbors. But that said, with our process, it's such a blank canvas that if neighbors engage through the permitting process or whatever, they're welcome to make suggestions to potentially either the design or our process that maybe would alleviate concerns they have. What if trees were planted here? What if fences were put in different places? Stuff like that. When we get to that point, is something that probably would make sense or could be accommodated, but we're a ways from there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The other thing developers also do is they buy things for the town. Like if this project's going to increase the fire needs of the town, buy a fire truck or put in. I've gone as far as building a school, but Section 12 of the agreement notes that the pre-development agreement is not a joint venture. And I think when some of the people feel that you are entering in a joint venture, at this point you're not, and it makes very clear that you're not. It's not a joint venture. But going forward, under the implementing documents, which is the second phase of this, you really are going into a joint venture. It's your land. You're going to be coming up with the funds. You're going to be part of the going back and forth on the approvals. None of you, I don't think any of the board or so forth, have ever been involved in such a project such as this. And therefore, I'm really urging you to get to know the developer a lot more than you've known him, and not just rely on the consultants. That would be my advice. But why stretch this project out 10 years from once you started? I have a unit right in the front, assuming, in phase one. Right? And for the next 10 years, construction trucks and contractors are going to be going through building the rest of this project. Why not put a top priority on it and go, and once you get the approvals, of course, and get everything nailed down, go and just build it right out.
So the phasing and the 10-year concept comes from from the developer's plan. We haven't really kind of commented on it yet because again, there hasn't been design or permitting or any of that stuff. Those are all good points. Those are things that the developer and the group that would potentially sell these units would have to kind of grapple with. And I think back to the kind of the beginning point. If and when there's a development agreement that gets executed, then there's going to be a pretty strong legal team that aids the town in reviewing that process and kind of setting up the mechanics of what that logistically would look like in order to actually carry out the development. There are some templates that can be used from other parts of Vermont, but the duration of time is it's a good point, and something that would have to be dealt with.
If I could just follow up on that, and I shared this with Ron. The developer has provided that investment analysis, and did I show you that?
Yes.
And, and I looked at that, and it appears that if I was given all the information, that they have $131 million, because you were asking for this in your pre-development.
Yep.
A source of cash flow, a cash flow statement, sources of funds and uses of funds.
Yep.
And I looked at what he had provided, or they provided, and there's $131 million worth of cash flowing into the project from all different sources, debt, the investment by the partners, and the sales proceeds, and $141 million going out. That's a $9 million deficit in cash. All right, how can a project work if just on that basis?
Yeah, it's a good question. That goes back to the gap that we had talked about earlier as to like why do these types of units not get built? Well, because they're generally, they're not profitable, so that they don't get built. And that, the math there kind of shows you that. And the general sense that I have is that, the development group is going to rely on, state, federal grants, tax credits, and the CHIP program to try to make those numbers, work to where it's actually executable.
We've looked at 8 projects.
Yep.
And some of it we discussed on this show that use sections 42 of the tax law, of the IRS law, which is the housing tax credits. And every one of those projects, the unit cost was $600,000. And these are small units, and their rents are all subsidized and so forth.
Yeah.
Right? Is that going to work? And has that been looked at by your consultants?
No, because we're not there yet.
Okay.
I mean, all we've done is just, they've created a concept. We're kind of responding to the concept. You're seeing us loop in public input. What's going to have to happen is, a deeper due diligence as far as, the developer is going to have to. I mentioned it earlier. Developer's going to have to go do the kind of permitting, designing, planning due diligence, and the town's going to have to, and the town and the developer. The developer will put together their financial stack of how they plan on doing things, and that'll have to get reviewed by town attorney, consultant, probably even maybe a third-party consultant that comes in and stress tests the financial packet that they're putting on the table. All that stuff would have to coalesce and come together before any agreements would actually get executed.
See how complex it is?
Yeah.
Now, if I may follow up on that, has anyone produced a timeline from where you are today to when Don Keeling can go into the first unit, assuming it goes through? Because I get the impression that, I know you've been working on this for several years, and given all that has to, as you mentioned, some of it, and the work that has to be done. And also now you've got the I think some serious opposition that we've seen based on the December hearings. What do you think the first unit will be delivered on this project if it were to move forward?
Good question. So my general, when we started, kind of the prognosis of where we were in terms of if we get a developer to respond and then we start to kind of work through pre-development, the general sense is that we're probably 1 to 2 years of permitting and design that are needed. And then in theory, at the end of that duration, you'd potentially have a home start to get built. So if it's 2026, to me, I would think it would be, potentially 2029, where, end of 2029.
And you and I both discussed that a square foot cost for housing today in this area to build is somewhat north of $500 a square foot, if not $600 right now. And therefore, if you're out that far,
what does that do to the numbers?
Any feasibility study done today on costs
will have to be updated.
right.
Yep.
and it may not be feasible in 2029. And then what's the fallback at that point?
It's a good question.
I don't mean to pin you down on this.
No,
but
no. I think these are good questions. I mean, I think the idea is that the legal agreement is set up in such a way that either the unit count gets reduced, right, and less is built, or something other than that, and maybe things aren't as executable as they otherwise seem to be before that.
Well, we're going to need to kind of wrap things up a little bit here. I know Don could probably keep you
Oh, yeah.
going
No, it's
here
an
for
important
another 3 or
issue,
4
and it's an
hours,
interesting
but,
discussion.
I guess I just wondered, what are the next steps that are going to be happening? You've got, excuse me, a couple of community forums planned later this month and then in February to kind of engage the public. And I'm assuming at town meeting there'll be some kind of conversation going on about this, or what will be happening in the next couple of months to help folks get it educated about it?
January 21st, Wednesday, January 21st, 5:30 p.m. at our town office at Raptor Lane and also online. There's going to be the first of a couple of initial meetings related to, the first one's going to cover housing, right, just as kind of a larger topic. We're going to have some of the market analysis information to basically give a presentation about housing, the need for housing, why we're talking about it, why it's potentially needed. Hopefully hear from employers, other community members as to the need, right? I mean, I think that's part of the part of what you saw us at the December meeting and kind of some of the public input process is there's going to be folks that say, well, this isn't needed. Is that true? Hopefully we'll find out and we'll be able to make kind of the case for. I mean, there's a reason that the state just changed the Act 250 because they feel that there's a need. It's pretty significant. So we'll backstop that housing discussion, the need discussion. At the meeting on the 21st, hopefully have the public kind of engage around a discussion around the need. And then the idea is that at the meeting at the 18th of February, that there would be a brief kind of overview of Raptor Lane, how the asset that it is, right? It's an 8-lot subdivision, a lot of opportunity there for something to happen. And then there would be a presentation of the Graves concept with the Graves team there to answer questions, and then hopefully have a discussion about what do people think about the concept? What's the unit count, the look, the target market, all that stuff, and try to get a sense of that public opinion. I mean, you talked about the folks being maybe opposed to it. We don't. It's too early for us to understand what folks think. So this is part of that process. We're going to learn what folks think by asking for their input. So
aren't you, can I ask one more? Are we not creating the wheel here in all due respect to what's going on? The governors, the state housing folks have indicated we need 40,000 housing units by 2030. Yep. Mayor Weinberger, I think it was Weinberger, the former mayor of Burlington, he's got a nonprofit that's working on housing.
Yeah. Business for All, I think.
Let's Build Homes.
Let's Build Homes.
Right.
I mean, they've done extensive studies on this. The need is there. I mean, why not rely on that data as opposed to trying to create? Look, anyone who says there's no need for affordable housing, not affordable housing, but workforce housing in this area, and housing for seniors, they got their head buried in the sand. I mean, that's flat out. I mean, when you see the hospital looking for help, when you see the state police looking for help, when you see the restaurants and the businesses in Manchester not being able to stay open, where was I the other day? And they had to close down. They had no help.
My best story in that line, Don, is that my son was a 7th grader at Dorset School, and they were looking for a math teacher, and found a math teacher recruited from out of state. The math teacher comes up for the 2 weekends to look for appropriate housing for their family, and couldn't find anything, and didn't take the job. And in so the school was, the school had to pivot and figure out what to do and how do you teach the 7th graders math, and they did that and they do an awesome job. But that's the type of impacts that we're, that we're seeing because of the general, the price points and then the lack of inventory are creating the need for these types of homes.
One of the things I've heard is that, you have, I think when I did the analysis, you have roughly about 550 folks working in Dorset. When you add up all your businesses, Long Trail School, Field Club, and J.K. Adams and so forth, if maybe understated. And there's a suggestion. Yes, we need the workforce, but we can provide funds for other towns to provide for the workforce housing. Have you heard that?
I mean, I've heard of that concept. I go back to, Vermont can only do what the state says we can do. So I'm not sure about how that would function. Why we would pay for homes in other communities rather than.
Well, let's say you came to Arlington, you gave us the money to build the housing, gave us the money for the infrastructure. We'll build the housing, and those folks can work up in Dorset. I mean, that's what I think is what's behind this.
That's the idea.
I'm not suggesting that by any means. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting suggestion. I don't know that it would make sense for the voters of Dorset to do that. We're in the regardless of kind of how it's looked at or arrived, the town owns Raptor Lane.
Yeah.
And there's until we don't own it, there's going to be a discussion about it's residential land. It's zoned for it. The topography is really conducive to putting a neighborhood in there that wouldn't be invasive to the rest of the community. There's a need. So I think, in our general sense is there's a need. We have an asset that is an opportunity, and now we got to work through what is that, what does the solution look like?
One quick question on the site plan. Phase 1 and Phase 3 are shown on this plan that Bowman did. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a question folks are asking too. Phase 4 and 5 could be commercial. What type of commercial are you talking about?
So the Bowman, the Graves group suggested that potential, once you had a cluster of folks living up there, they suggested that there could be commercial stuff up there. Right now, it's residentially zoned. So my general sense is that there's no appetite to put commercial stuff up there, so it probably wouldn't happen.
Be more housing.
It
could be more housing.
Yeah, it's residentially zoned, and right, the town, the planning commission, the select board, all decided for that to be residentially zoned because they feel that that's the prudent allocation for that land. So we have other commercial stuff, not far away.
I think that needs to be clarified. I'm hearing that because are you going to put a Value Line, a Jiffy Lube station there?
No, so it's not zoned for any kind of commercial activity, so it wouldn't happen.
But some of the wording in the documents talk about commercial.
Yeah.
And then this is proposed. Nothing is defined here.
Yeah. So Graves has got a proposal, and then we have to go through it and figure out what we like, what we don't like.
How are we on time?
All right. I think we're just about out of time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We're going to have to leave it there for today. So I guess folks who are passionate on this whole subject, there's that meeting on the 21st at the town hall.
Yeah, they can go on the town's website and at www.dorsetvt.org and get all the information that we have is up there. And there also is a way that they can actually add themselves to email updates over the website.
So no one can complain they didn't know about it if they wanted to know about it. All right. Well, let's leave it there then, and thank you very much, Rob Gaiotti, Town Manager of Dorset, for walking us through this really quite interesting project here that you got going on, and we'll be curious to see how it all plays out in the end. But anyway, we'll find out as we go forward. And once again, thank you, Don, for being here.
Thank you.
Co-hosting. Thank you to everyone who's been watching. Hope you found the program interesting. I sure did, anyway. Always something new to learn about this project. There's multiple layers to it, it seems like.
Yep.
Anyway, all right. Well, that'll do it for today. Thanks again.